Hi, good morning, everybody. It is 10 a.m. on the dot, so I am going to go ahead and kick us off. I know we are in the midst of, as usual, folks joining the line, so we will do our best to allow a few minutes to get people connected here. We're going to have, I think, quite a few folks on the line, which is great. As always, with items of connecting, we're going to do our best to keep track of everybody on the line, as well as help with background noise and other logistics. So I'll go through kind of an intro here, but just as a heads up, as kind of to start things off, when you do arrive, if you can mute yourself with the Zoom function, there's a mute button. That would be great. That helps us with background noise, echoes, and all that fun stuff. If we do get some feedback from your line, we may have to mute you. So just a heads up that we might help with that as well. Otherwise, we are also requesting folks to use the chat box to enter their name and affiliation. We'd love to capture as much as we can who all is on the line today. So if you'd like to just use the chat box to do that, that would be great. Otherwise, we will keep an eye out on the chat for anything else we can help with. If you're having any issues with the connection or anything along those lines, use the chat function, and Marissa Nixon and I are the two kind of hosts today, and we'll be happy to help and see if we can assist. Otherwise, I will do a quick intro of kind of the logistics, and then we'll get started. So I mentioned a few of these already, but just to start, if you can mute, that would be great. Appreciate the help with that. If you're on the phone, *6 is the way to mute, and that will help us, again, keep background noise to a minimum if possible. We are requesting folks to introduce themselves, not by audio. We're not going to go around the full room here just for sake of time, but if you can use the chat box for your name and affiliation, that would be great. We will capture that, and we'll include that at a minimum, just affiliation of groups represented today, to try and help share the word of who was on the line, as well as inform us of groups that are interested in attending and learning more about our efforts. We are also going to have opportunities for question and answer during the presentations. We are going to ask that those stay just in the chat, again, for sake of background noise, and just helping with audio, video. The presenters obviously
Um,
audio, video,
I don't think
but
it's a bad idea. I think
sorry, there, that's the muting part. If we can help with that, that would be great. So with questions, those coming through the chat would be great. We will track that, and we will keep an eye on it. So when questions do come up, we will try to capture a few of those, and time permitting, ask those ourselves directly to the presenters on your behalf, and share those. I will note that we will share all questions and all presentation slides after the meeting. So for those questions that we don't get to in real time, since again, we are going to be pretty tightly packed here with updates, that we will get those questions out to the presenters. And if we can't answer them in real time, we will do our best to get some answers and feedback in writing, and then have those shared with the larger group. So again, we can have some of the dialogue continue there. We are recording the meeting, so the intention is to be able to share that recording after the fact. So this will probably be put on our website as a video, YouTube most likely, so folks can view this if you're not able to attend today, but want to have the recording or share parts of it or the full recording with others. We'll do our best to make that available as well. Last but not least, just at the start, and we'll share throughout, contact info for myself, John Hansen, coordinator of the West Coast Ocean Alliance, as well as Marissa Nixon, who helps staff the Alliance and the Ocean Data Portal that you'll hear more about this morning. Those emails are obviously the quickest way to get to us, and we're happy to follow up both on items as we go today, as well as follow-ups after the forum this morning. Otherwise, if folks have any issues, please let us know. The chat box, again, is the best way to get in touch with us in real time. Marissa, let me know if anything pops up that we can help with. And otherwise, just a reminder for folks, one, to
yeah.
mute
Sorry,
yourself if
I missed
possible.
something.
That would be great. And two, to use the chat box for introductions, for name and affiliation, so we can capture that as well. With that, I will jump in here and start with just a quick review of the agenda, mostly just to say we're going to spend the first 10 to 15 minutes with an update on the latest happenings of the West Coast Ocean Alliance, the group I coordinate with Marissa's help, as well as the West Coast Ocean Data Portal, which is our partner group that's been working on data here on the West Coast for a number of years. Then I won't go through the agenda in detail, but encourage folks to take a look at that and flip through to see what items will be covered, and we'll try our best to stick to time, obviously, and also point you to the abstract document we sent out that does include a bit of background information on each of the presentations and who's going to be presenting those. I will just flag for our presenters, just to let you know, as we've talked about, we're going to keep you to roughly 10 minutes per presentation and then include a couple minutes for Q&A after. I'm going to keep time, and I know this is always the fun part of trying to kind of be the enforcer of timing. I'm going to give you all a 1-minute warning as you go through your talk, so I will keep time separately on my screen, but as we go through the update and your presentations, I will jump on and just give you a 1-minute warning when we're wrapping up in hopes that we can stick to time as best we can. So with that, so far we're 5 minutes in and we're on time. So I'm going to begin with West Coast Ocean Alliance update, share a little bit about what our group has been up to the last couple of years, and then hand off to Marissa in a few minutes to talk about the West Coast Ocean Data Portal. So by way of background, this is something I think many of you know, but I know probably not all of you are as familiar with the history of West Coast regional ocean governance, as I broadly term it, and how conversations have happened on the West Coast. So this slide is an attempt to share a bit of background just on what the West Coast Ocean Alliance is, but also where some previous efforts have focused and how those have evolved up to the present and the group we stand with today. So going back, 15 years, we've had discussions on the West Coast at a regional scale around ocean health. The earliest version of that came through the governor's offices on the 3 West Coast states and was formulated through the West Coast Governor's Agreement on Ocean Health. That evolved a bit over time in those early years, shifting to the West Coast Governor's Alliance on Ocean Health, focused on a range of issues from marine debris to ocean education to a number of others. And I know a number of you on the line were involved with those efforts at the earliest stages. We also did in that phase have the spinoff of the West Coast Ocean Data Portal. Ocean data has been a key priority focus for these discussions, going back to the very earliest elements of it. And not surprisingly, that's maintained a key focus for us. And the West Coast Ocean Data Portal effectively stood up its own efforts around that focus area back in 2012, 2010 sort of time range, and has since then really sort of stood itself up in this focus of ocean data that we continue to partner with today. On the federal level, there was the first national ocean policy from the Obama administration in 2010, and that kicked us into a bit of a different phase. In 2012, we really initiated discussions with federal, state, and tribal partners on the West Coast around what a regional planning body would look like per the language of that executive order. There was a focus and basically an opportunity through that EO to create a regional planning body with a focus on ocean planning. And so partners on the West Coast really discussed what that meant in the context of state, tribal, federal partnerships, also building on the previous discussions that had happened through the governor's agreement that came prior. So we did formulate a West Coast regional planning body under that executive order for the entire West Coast that did have, through the executive order language, the initiation of sort of formal federal participation in those discussions. And so that was a new phase to bring feds into a more formal role in implementing ocean planning efforts and looking towards an ocean plan being developed for the West Coast. We did have a West Coast Ocean Partnership continue that was separate but parallel, but was basically continuation of governor's agreement discussions, but really ultimately became a really cohesive conversation between tribal governments, the 3 West Coast states, and federal agencies. In 2018, we had obviously a new administration, and then a new executive order around oceans was released by the Trump administration. That shifted away from the regional planning body structure, but allowed continuation of regional ocean partnerships, as they were broadly termed, in those regions that chose to do so. So that really kicked us into a phase of discussing on the West Coast what that meant for us and our regional needs and how we could continue the conversation if especially state and tribal governments wanted it to continue, what it should look like. And so that's what got us to the West Coast Ocean Alliance. We basically took all the previous efforts, both regional planning body, ocean partnership, put it under one umbrella of the West Coast Ocean Alliance as a way to continue our forum in bringing together tribes, states, and feds in the vein of the previous regional conversations, but do so in what's now termed a regional ocean partnership. So that's where we stand today as of 2021, obviously building on years of work and really strong relationships between tribal, state, and federal reps here on the West Coast. From there, I'm going to shift a bit just to our structure and then talk about what we're focusing on. Again, tribal, state, and federal membership, that's what our group is really focused on. We have an executive committee made up of federal, state, and tribal leads. And so that's a group that at a smaller scale helps kind of lead more of the day-to-day operation of the group. But we continue to operate both regionally and sub-regionally and trying to connect those partners at the broader scale as well as more state and tribal scales to make sure that the issues and topics the most importance at the various areas of the West Coast are being addressed. We obviously link to the Ocean Data Portal. You hear more about what they're up to. But ultimately, we're really trying to be responsive to what the region needs. And that's largely driven by our tribes and our states. Our federal partners do not really come in and say, this is a top-down approach. They've always really focused on this being bottom-up, and the sense of tribal governments and state governments identifying needs and what gaps and areas need to be addressed, and how feds can be responsive to that, but that ultimately tribes and states are really the ones that are help steering the ship, so to speak. Last but not least, this last bullet is a key one. We are non-regulatory. So what our group does in no way impacts existing law, statutes, regulations, consultation, anything else. It's really meant to be more of a collaboration to bring partners together in a way that then informs their own decision-making process, whether through tribal areas, state government, or federal government, that those really remain in the places where decisions have always been made and will continue to be. So broadly, this is something now we're really assessing in terms of the functions of the Ocean Alliance, kind of where we are in 2021. And I'm going to just hit these at a high level. Again, I would encourage folks, this is a very condensed conversation. So if you have additional questions or thoughts, please feel free to share in the chat box. And also, we're going to make ourselves fully available to share more info on this if you'd be interested. But one, first and foremost, we want to solve problems. So really identifying, again, from tribal state perspectives with federal participation, what are the issues that people see needing to be addressed, and how can we start to present some solutions and opportunities to discuss them. To that end, we do have this regional ocean forum. Ultimately, that's one of the biggest things we provide, is a chance for folks to get together on a regular, predictable basis, talk about the issues they're dealing with, hear updates, hear upcoming policies, opportunities for engagement, public meetings, all of those types of things, so that state, federal, and tribal conversations can be more efficient and more connected. And then lastly, we want to amplify the West Coast. Obviously, we are not DC, and a lot of things happen in DC and in other regions. Sometimes there is a bit of an East Coast bias, and so we really want to make sure we are bringing the story of the West Coast to partners at the federal level, at leadership levels, but sharing nationally what is of sort of most importance on the West Coast. To that end, we have identified 3 priority topics recently, and so these are the 3 things we are really sinking our teeth into in terms of areas that our group has identified. One is tribal engagement. This is a big one, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, but this is something from the very start of our regional planning body days and up to the present that our tribes have expressed a lot of desire to really have a more effective approach to engaging with tribes. So we've worked really hard on that, and that's going to continue to be a priority for us. The other is ocean energy, the next is ocean energy. So this is taking shape in a number of ways, but obviously offshore wind is a big piece of that. That's going through the channels that it always has gone through on the West Coast in terms of state task forces being supported by BOEM and other efforts. But it is something our group wants to keep tabs on and understand where everybody fits in and kind of what pieces are coming that we can be on top of. And the last is aquaculture. So understanding what is happening in terms of aquaculture. Obviously, that's been around a number of years in various ways, but with new federal policies around aquaculture, state activities, it is something that we want to be on top of, connect our states to understand what each state is doing, what policies are emerging at a federal level, and how to be engaged on those. We have this next term, infrastructure. So this is one where we're kind of understanding with the topic specific areas like tribes, energy, aquaculture, we really want to understand how data fits in. So that's going to be a key piece, and I'm going to hand to Marissa here in a second on what that really means. And ultimately building relationships. This is really a key one, not always easy to define, but one that we really want to link players to understand how we all fit and how we understand where everybody's coming from and build stronger relationships amongst one another. Tribal engagement, I'm just going to quickly flag our link, westcoastoceanalliance.org/tribal-engagement. I would strongly encourage you to check that out if you haven't seen it. Our guidance document is there. It's a capturing of lessons and real goals around tribal engagement that our tribal caucus members developed. So we're really rolling that out. NOAA is starting a training on that. We're talking with federal and state partners about other training opportunities and really thinking about how to build trainings around this tribal engagement document, but ultimately using the lessons in that document document to inform tribal engagement, share with other regions around the US, and really understand how tribes can be really recognized as the co-management players that they are, and understand how to work with them more effectively. In terms of aquaculture and ocean energy, we're working on work plans for these right now, but I wanted to list some bullets just to give you examples of things we're talking about around a forum for aquaculture and ocean energy, connecting staff, identifying planning and science questions, getting an inventory of projects. These are the types of things we're really trying to explore and find a fit for our role, not reinvent any wheels that are already out there, but better understand on a regional scale how we can dig into these. So again, for sake of time, I'm not going to go through in detail, but happy to connect with folks if you'd like to learn more. Next steps for us, really, again, refining some of the things I just talked about, developing work plans for these three topics. We're tracking federal level activities. Obviously, we have a new administration. We're waiting to see if and when a new executive order on oceans might come and how we can inform that. There is legislation out there related to regional ocean partnerships. Just recently, a bill authorizing ROPs in NOAA was introduced. And so I point folks to that if you're interested in seeing where that might go. But then for this group, looking for ways we can continue to connect with others outside of government, so not federal, tribal, and state, but other NGO partners, industry, academics, connect our group to those, and here, like in forums like this, where we can learn from one another, but also keep people updated on what we're up to. So with that, I will now shift over to data portal activities and maybe stop my sharing, and Marissa, let you share the latest from the data portal side. Great. You're on mute, Marissa. Just wanted to mention that.
Thanks, John. I was trying to find my hidden buttons. Hi, everyone, and thanks again, John. My name is Marissa, and I currently work as staff for the West Coast Ocean Alliance and the West Coast Ocean Data Portal, which are closely related entities, as I will explain in a moment. And we're really excited to briefly share what we've been up to recently with this group. So the West Coast Ocean Data Portal was started in 2013, actually, as a product of the West Coast Governors Alliance on Ocean Health. So one of those previous entities that John just described in his timeline of the West Coast Ocean Alliance. It was created in order to increase discovery and connectivity of ocean and coastal data and people to better inform resource management, policy development, and planning on the West Coast. So it brings together existing data resources on the West Coast, making them accessible through an easy to search catalog, as well as allowing users to visualize data sets together through a web mapping application. In terms of its current organizational structure and how it fits into the West Coast Ocean Alliance universe, we view the West Coast Ocean Alliance as kind of our client as the data portal. And so some of the goals that John mentioned previously, the compatible and sustainable ocean uses, effective and transparent decision-making, and then comprehensive ocean and coastal data, we view ourselves as really trying to fill that role for the Ocean Alliance. Since its inception in 2013 under the West Coast Governors Alliance, again, John mentioned that that group went through a lot of different iterations. But if you look at this umbrella structure on the right, you can see that under the Alliance, we have an executive committee that helps with some of our guiding decision making. And then underneath that, we have John as the coordinator and then two co-chairs of the West Coast Ocean Data Portal. And then there are two groups that really push forward decision making in the data portal realm, and those are our development team that really focus more on the technical side of things, and then our portal coordination team that focus more on kind of the bigger picture and direction that we want to take the data portal. So in terms of our current focus, we have been since 2019 putting together a series of technical upgrades in order to keep its technology relevant. And that work will continue this year. I'm not going to read each of these, but altogether these upgrades have allowed for easier maintenance of the portal. They've allowed support for different web services, and they've simplified the creation and publication of story maps that will eventually highlight resources available through the portal. So in 2021, we're really looking forward to continuing to update our catalog and content, as well as adding some new features and building out some things that were allowed by our recent content management system update. Another important focus right now of the data portal is what we're calling our West Coast Ocean Health Dashboard. So this began in 2019, and we envision it as really a 3 to 5 year effort to just get it off of the ground for our inaugural dashboard report. We heard from our West Coast Ocean Alliance members that there was interest from some state legislatures in an indicator-based report card product that provided measures of ocean health over time and was easily accessible by the public. And so we decided to try and meet that need at a coast-wide level, but also make sure that it was scalable for the needs of our states and our tribes. So the goal here is really to facilitate access to ocean health data, and through that process to develop a common language for reporting status and trends on the West Coast. So for the past year, we've been working on 3 pilot indicators. These include beach water quality, kelp, and ocean acidification. The OA indicator work has been in partnership with NANUS, the Northwest Association of Networked Ocean Observing Systems. The water quality, beach water quality work has been in partnership with Heal the Bay, which is a California-based nonprofit. And the kelp work is currently in a pilot phase where we're working with a group of researchers in Southern California. So unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, we have been working on a prettier framework and logo, but unfortunately they haven't reached final approval yet. So I don't get to share that stuff today, but keep an eye out for some new materials on this project soon. And finally, I just want to point out that another tool the portal is focusing on developing at this time is an offshore wind mapping tool. In 2019, the state of Oregon and BOEM chose to recommit to an intergovernmental renewable energy task force together, which is focused on offshore wind planning with a meaningful and effective data gathering and engagement process. So the West Coast Ocean Data Portal is being used to host, organize, and curate a catalog of regional data sources in order to support this process. So this slide represents the data gathering exercise. And then this is a screenshot of the current Oro wind map with some example layers displayed. So for the rest of this year, we're focused on adding more data layers that are relevant to the wind planning process. And we will be adding new features such as some new measurement tools and the ability to work together and create maps and groups. So I'm going to stop there. If you're interested in learning more about the West Coast Ocean Data Portal, here's the contact information for myself and our 2 co-chairs, Andy Lanier with the Oregon Coastal Management Program and Steve Weisberg with the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project. If you have spatial data, especially if it's provided as a web service somewhere, we would love to connect to it in our data portal. So please do reach out. So thanks very much for listening and looking forward to hearing from all of our stakeholder presentations today. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Marissa. Appreciate it. Let's jump right into those because I know we're a couple minutes past the 10:20 mark and I want to get Allie up here first. So Allie, I'll maybe call you up to start screen sharing. But just as a reminder to folks, for questions, I know we don't have time right now, but please get in touch with us or put them in the chat box and we'll definitely be happy to address follow-up questions on the Alliance and the data portal activities. But with that, maybe Allie, I will hand it to you to introduce yourself and jump right in.
1 minute, hold on.
Right.
And can you see my presentation okay?
Yeah, looks great. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. I'm Allie Burgos with the University of California, Santa Barbara. And I want to begin by acknowledging that UCSB is located on the unceded territory of the Chumash Nation. So today I will be talking to you about RESON, which stands for the Regional Ecosystem Services Observation Network. This project just kicked off this past February and is led by UCSB, and I'm the project coordinator for this work. So a little bit of background. This is a 3-year project funded by the National Science Foundation from their Coastline and People, or COPE program. If you're not familiar with that, they're trying to create these coastal research hubs and support basically the research and interactions between our coastal environment, natural hazards, and people and their environment, and that entire interaction. So for Resin, our mission is to conceptualize and design a new marine ecosystem monitoring system. Right now, we're looking at doing this for the Southern and Central California coast with the idea that the framework that we create will be applicable to other regions along the West Coast as well. So we think this infrastructure is necessary to take the pulse of coastal ecosystems, spanning their structure, function, and services provided to people to better manage and restore our ecosystems. So we would like to build upon and strengthen the connection between current observation networks and be able to provide better temporal and spatial resolution for ecosystem processes so we can detect and forecast change in the coastal environment. So right now, California has absolutely some of the best ocean research and monitoring systems around. Here's an example of just some of the programs that are out there. In no means is this fully comprehensive, but we're looking to build upon and expand on some of these networks. And so here are a few of the ones that we are looking at for our starting point. Now, while there are many different monitoring networks out there, we recognize that there's still significant gaps. And currently, monitoring systems can't address the regional and global shifts in biodiversity, coastal communities, and ecosystem services. Only a small fraction of these ecosystems are monitored, unfortunately, and specific areas might not be represented. So there is, as I'm sure many of you know, there's a very strong disconnect between our physical data and our biological data. You know, it's easy to throw a temperature probe out into the water and continuously collect that data, but we don't have that right now for the biological side. And, you know, we'll have surveys go out maybe twice a year. Sometimes you'll get things that are looked at weekly, but certainly not at the same scale that physical data is being collected. So the idea is if that we can match that physical and biological data, then we can have further insights into how our coastal ecosystem is doing. Is it healthy? Is it stressed? And why? To do this, though, we need faster and higher quality ways to collect time series data with a broader spatial scale. So we are looking at emerging and underused technology to see if we can fill in those data gaps. Different ones that we're thinking about are AUVs, UAVs, imaging systems like flow cytometers, which SCOOS is currently doing a pilot project for. Also active and passive sonar, genomics, including barcoding, metabarcoding, and eDNA, and animal tagging. Now, ideally, all of this would come together and we'd have a comprehensive technological network to monitor our ecosystems, including things like biodiversity, ecosystem health, and animal migration. That could show us new biophysical links, dynamics, and emergent stressors. And these new insights could help build and validate models to forecast future ecosystem change, guide resource management and mitigation efforts, and potentially even predict fish catches. So that is the overall Resin vision. Moving forward, our current objective is to bring together a diverse group of people who care about the long-term health of California's coastal ecosystem. Not only do we want to create a technology network, but we also want to create a network of people. We want these people to help shape Resin's framework, which we're doing through a workshop series and continuous group engagement. And through that, we will determine the current and emerging coastal monitoring needs of these groups, figure out where those knowledge gaps are, and then ways to fill those with new or underused technology. So again, Resin right now is all, it's conceptualizing this framework and creating the framework. So we have our, and then lastly, we're hoping that we will receive further funding to actually make this network operational. So we have our first, I'm sorry, I'm not sure why this looks a little different, but we have our first workshop planned at the end of this month, where we're bringing many groups together to better understand their needs and have them help us identify what ecosystem variables are impactful and feasible for resin to monitor. So looking at the diagram to the right, this gives an idea of our thought process working through our first workshop. So starting at the bottom, right now, people are observing the state of the ocean, like temperature and salinity. And this gives us an idea of the state of the ocean's ecosystem, such as biodiversity. How our ecosystem is doing, though, affects everyone. And what specifically people care about is what we are listening to for our workshop. So moving to the top right box, we want to have a clearer look at what the societal needs are for ocean data and knowledge of our ocean ecosystems. So here are some examples of some of the questions that we will be working through for our workshop. Determining that then informs resin, which can then improve our ability to observe the state of the ocean. So again, this workshop is happening at the end of this month, and these are the groups that will be involved at that workshop. I think I saw a few names on the list of people at this meeting who will also be there. If you're not sure of an acronym, please feel free to ask me. And finally, so resin is led by Bob Miller. He's the PI of the project at UCSB, but we are made up of a larger steering committee with the other members listed here. So with that, thank you. Please visit our website. There is a newsletter that you can sign up for. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And if you'd like to get involved in this project, especially just learning more about it and getting more involved in the future, please let me know and send me an email. So I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Allie. Appreciate it. We'll just point folks to the chat box if you do have any questions that you want to fire in for Allie while we still have her, and we can pass those along. But otherwise, the website, and we can pass along contact info. Also, just as a note, we will be sharing slides after the fact, if all right with our presenters, and so we'll put that into a PDF and let folks get copies of the slides as well. But any questions at this point? I'm not seeing any come in yet. So what we might do is keep an eye on that. And if you do have questions or other thoughts that come up, please use the chat box and we'll capture those, and definitely be happy to connect you with Allie after the fact. Great. Well, let's keep moving. Thank you so much, Allie. Really appreciate it. So next up, we have Dom and Melissa. Dom and Melissa, if you're there, I may have you screen share to get your slides up and maybe introduce yourselves and take it away to give us an update on the latest work on ocean acidification you're involved with.
Sure thing. Thanks, John. So can folks confirm that you can see my screen?
Looks great.
Okay, wonderful. Good afternoon. Well, good morning. It's still the morning. My name is Dominic Kone, and I am a science officer with the California Ocean Science Trust. And today I'll be presenting with Dr. Melissa Ward, who's a postdoc at San Diego State. And we're going to be giving a very brief, very high-level overview of a multidisciplinary project that we are working on to understand US West Coast coastal community vulnerability and adaptive capacity to OA. And this project is funded by the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program. So over a 3-year period, we're really trying to accomplish 3 main objectives. And the first one is going to be using both oceanographic and, oh, hearing some music here. Oceanographic and social science data to look at both sensitivity and adaptive capacity of resource-dependent communities. And then the second phase will be pairing those findings with an analysis of existing policies that either support or don't support current or future adaptation needs. And then thirdly, we'll be conducting outreach and engagement throughout the entire life of this project to make sure that we're producing policy relevant work and communicating, getting the right information in the hands of the right people. And next, I'll kick it over to Melissa.
Awesome. Thanks, Dom. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Probably most of you all know this information already, but I think it's a good starting place. So for those of you who do not know, as the CO2 in the atmosphere is going up, the ocean absorbs a lot of that CO2 like a sponge, about a quarter to a third of that CO2. And when the CO2 reacts with seawater, it consumes carbonate ions, which is shown in this picture here, and produces bicarbonate ions. And the reason we care about that is because carbonate ions are a key building block to organisms that build shells, such as corals, many small plankton, some of which salmon consume, and in the case of our project, shellfish along the West Coast. And go ahead and click to the next slide, John. So to address the severity and the impacts of ocean acidification and other climate-related stressors along the West Coast, we're part of a huge research team from PIs from OSU, OST, San Diego State, UC Davis, UC Santa Cruz that have all come together to take this multi-tiered approach in looking at the stressors and impacts along the coastline. So the first part of that project is to use the huge amounts of existing data that have not been previously coalesced to produce this geospatial assessment of when and where temperature, ocean acidification, and hypoxia conditions might be most stressful. And I'll show you some preliminary results from that in a minute here. And then we took that biophysical vulnerability assessment to inform our site selection for a social vulnerability assessment. So looking at the locations and times when conditions were most stressful, and then input from an advisory board led us to select these sites you see along the bottom. So Yaquina Bay, Tillamook, Coos Bay, Carlsbad, Santa Barbara, and San Diego Bay were all selected as sites where social vulnerability might be high, with an eye towards shellfish aquaculture in particular. And those are additional sites to preliminary work in existing shellfish communities along California's coast, which we will also highlight. So why don't we click to the next one there? So to the previous point of the biophysical vulnerability assessment, these are just some of the outputs of the data sets that we have combined so far. So these data, this work brings in a huge number of existing data sets from the observing buoys, from cruise lines, from long-term monitoring data sets, anything that we could get our hands on essentially. And that data set currently has over 5 million data points and reflects over 50 years. So you can see kind of the whole data set on the left in that figure is temperature data. So that's all the temperature data we have. And we can produce a whole bunch of different maps. One example is the one on the right, which is a gridded map that shows the average pH along California's coastline. That's a 50-year average in the upper 50 meters of the water column. So this is a huge effort led by a large number of people, but those are just some of the examples of the geospatial assessments we can do. We hope to add in things like, positive ENSO cycle versus not positive, and produce a bunch of spatial plots of these factors. Next slide, Dom. So the other part of that objective is the social vulnerability. And part of understanding social vulnerability is looking at the avenues of adaptive capacity that shellfish farmers can use. So this is preliminary results from interviews with about half, maybe more, of the existing shellfish farms in California. And what we've identified are categories for adaptive capacity that the growers are saying they use or would like to use to be adaptive to ocean acidification specifically, and also broadly environmental change moving forward. So for example, they use a variety of farm management strategies, such as changing the water upon intake. They may change the gear that they use. There are scientific strategies employed by growers, like trying to identify the drivers of shellfish mortality, which is a big gap. And then there are a variety of policy, regulatory, and networking strategies that they also identify in interviews. So for example, having a regulatory response to water quality changes that is timely is something that growers identify. And there's a whole bunch of these, and we're hoping to release a paper on these strategies in the coming months or years. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And I think next slide is yours, Dom, so take it away.
All right, thanks. So in the second phase of this project, we're going to take a lot of the outputs that Melissa was just covering and compare those with an analysis of these existing OA-specific as well as aquaculture policies that may facilitate or hinder the adaptive capacity of the shellfish growers. And we're specifically looking at either federal, state, or tribal policies. But what we're really hoping to get from this comparison is to potentially identify some alignments or even misalignments of what adaptive strategies the growers are saying they need or they're aware of, and the policies that might or might not meet their needs to adapt. And then for the third objective, throughout the entire life of the project, we will be convening and coordinating with an advisory board, which is made up of federal, state, and tribal resource managers, so that they can advise us on both the policy and the management relevance of our research, and advise on anything from our approach to our questions or key factors that we're pulling out. And then secondly, we'll be creating different science communication products to keep everyone informed and engaged in the process, but then hopefully learn from them on what information they need to allow them to adapt. And then lastly, to wrap things up, through doing this engagement, we can help to achieve a couple things along the way. First, we can get everyone on the same page with what the key information is so that we can create a shared knowledge of what the science is. We can listen to the needs of the stakeholders, which will help us ensure that the research is both societally and policy relevant. And then through those actions, we can start to facilitate some of these more productive conversations around what's needed and start to establish trust and some partnerships between all these different players. And hopefully by achieving all of these sub-motivations, we can start to spur some conversations around where we go from here, as in, what are some scientifically based actions that we could take now or in the near future to help some of these communities respond and adapt to ocean acidification? And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Well, we're happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Dom. Thanks, Melissa. You guys are great so far, right on time, both Ali and you guys. Appreciate it. Some good questions are coming in here, and we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we have a couple minutes. And so maybe I'll just offer up one that you can tackle from Alex Harper. She asked to see if you can explain a bit more about how you chose the targeted regions in this project, and that she was a bit surprised not to see Humboldt Bay on your list. So maybe can you just provide a little bit of background there?
Yeah, Melissa, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I tried to answer quickly in the chat, but we didn't have much time to explain. But basically, the Ocean Protection Council funded sort of half of this work, and we got to do all those preliminary results were from that work, which did include Humboldt Bay. So we have already interviewed shellfish farmers in Humboldt, the Point Reyes region, and the San Luis Obispo Morro Bay region. And now we have additional funding to expand to more shellfish communities, including some in Oregon, and then those additional ones in California. So absolutely, Humboldt was included in the project. It was just a bit much to explain in 10 minutes.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. Yes, we are not giving you enough time to really dig deep into these
No
projects,
problem.
but it is, I think, really helpful to get kind of, surface scratch of these, and then definitely have some follow-ups if folks have others. I'm going to keep us moving. I know we have more questions, and we'll definitely capture those and pass those along as well and get you some answers. But for sake of time on the agenda, why don't we keep moving? And thank you, Dom. Thank you, Melissa. Great update and appreciate it. And we will shift now from OA to Sea Stars. And Sarah, if you are there, I may ask you to screen share and let you take it away from there.
Great. Are folks able to see my screen all right? Can you hear me?
Yep, it looks great. Sounds great.
Wonderful. Okay. Let me just move some of my slides around. There we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Hamilton, and I'm a PhD candidate at Oregon State University. And I'm here today to present on work that I've helped lead, assessing the status of the sunflower sea star, as well as observations about modern conservation that I've kind of drawn from some of this work. So this work is the product of a large group of fantastic collaborators and was supported by funding from the Nature Conservancy. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, I think I've got this. Okay, everyone, I'd like you to meet the sunflower sea star, also known as Pycnopodia helianthores. It is the world's largest sea star. Hold on one second here. Can't quite get my screens the way I need them. There we go, perfect. It is the world's largest sea star, growing to be over 1 meter in diameter and having more than 20 arms. It is a generalist predator that likes to eat urchins, clams, mussels, and really whatever else it can find. Historically, they were found all along the West Coast, from Baja California, Mexico, up to the Aleutian Islands, seen here in purple on this map. And they were found in all kinds of habitats, particularly in shallow waters of less than about 25 meters. And for a long time, they were a pretty common sight for divers up and down the coast. These big sea stars can have big impacts on the ecosystems around them. Since the sunflower sea star likes to eat urchins, researchers have found that they can decrease the densities and grazing of urchins so much that it actually allows kelp forests to flourish. Now, the effects of sunflower stars aren't as strong as those of like sea otters on kelp forests. And there's still a lot of important questions about when and where sunflower stars play this important top predator role. But still, this suggests that they can be a major urchin predator and are likely important to kelp forest resilience here on the West Coast. Now, over here on the right, I've outlined the ranges of the West Coast's most important urchin predators, which have all been shown to protect kelp forests from overgrazing. You'll notice that historically, the sunflower star actually had the largest range, and in many places was the only major urchin predator around. So while they've received much less study than these other species listed here, like otters, sheep's head, and lobsters, they have potentially a crucial role to play in North America's kelp forests. So what happened to our friend the sunflower star? As many of you may be aware, starting around 2013, the sea star wasting disease started killing sea stars up and down the West Coast. The disease affected multiple species of stars from Baja to Alaska and caused skin lesions that looked like they were physically melting the stars away, as you can kind of see in that picture up there. Last year, my colleagues and I collected over 42,000 surveys on historic and present populations of sunflower stars across their entire range and found that overall, the epidemic had reduced the species size by about 91%, and that an estimated 5.7 billion, with a B, sunflower stars had died. Now, these numbers were bad enough that they were immediately listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List, and they were the first sea star species to be listed. So currently, the species is essentially functionally extinct in the lower half of its range, from Mexico to the outer coast of Washington. The remaining populations exist primarily in Alaska and Canada and are made up of much smaller, patchy populations. So far, we see no signs of the species recovering in population size, and we actually see evidence of continuing declines in their population size in some parts of Canada and Alaska. So that's kind of the status of what happened and where they are now. And I can say that there's a lot of really exciting conservation work going on to try to protect and restore the species, which I'd be happy to speak with people more about afterwards. But I'd like to spend the rest of my time talking about the implications for the West Coast and the lessons that we can learn from this event. So what are we losing here? Well, clearly there's a real risk of extinction for the sunflower star, which is pretty astounding for an animal that was widely distributed along the entire continent less than a decade ago. But additionally, we've lost one more urchin predator along the West Coast, which could be another blow to kelp forests that are already struggling with marine heat waves, invasive species, pollution, and more. Less than a year after sunflower stars disappeared, the kelp forests in Northern California collapsed in a frenzy of urchin grazing. And here in Oregon, we've seen alarming numbers of purple urchins that have prompted kelp forest restoration projects. In fact, in many places up and down the coast, With the loss or the reduction of the sunflower star, those places have lost the last real urchin predator they've had. So to be clear, in Northern California and Oregon, scientists can't definitely say that the loss of this one sea star is the thing that has caused these wildly increasing numbers of purple urchins. But it's hard to avoid the fact that this epidemic has dealt one more blow to kelp forest ecosystems across North America at a time when they're already struggling. So what can we learn more broadly about conservation in the 21st century from the sad case of the sunflower sea star? Well, first, I would argue that this is a thoroughly 21st century kind of ecological disaster, and that these kinds of disasters are becoming more common. So what do I mean by a 21st century kind of disaster? Well, the causes are complex, if known at all, and often involve indirect impacts of humans, like climate change. Historically, a lot of our ecological disasters had more obvious causes that were direct effects of humans. So things like overfishing, damming, direct pollution. Additionally, these disasters can happen suddenly, especially when they are the products of new or emerging diseases. It took more than 50 years of intense overfishing to deplete the Atlantic cod, but it only took a few years to nearly lose the sunflower star across an entire continent. And finally, the drastic and sudden nature of these modern ecological disasters, when they happen to keystone or foundational species, they can also reorganize major world ecosystems in decades rather than centuries. Now, obviously, these won't be the only kind of ecological disasters in the 21st century, but research shows that these kinds of mass mortality events are becoming more common. And I would argue that we as a society have no idea what to do with them. So my second point, if we need to expect more of these sudden, hard to predict ecological disasters, how do we respond to these kinds of modern catastrophes? So think about this. It's been 8 years since sea star wasting started. It has been 8 years since one of the worst marine die-offs in recorded history happened across an entire continent, wiping out billions of animals of multiple species. And you know what? We still don't even know what actually causes this disease, and we're years away from making meaningful policy changes in response to it. Science, management, and policy move slowly, but these new modern ecological disasters don't. And this brings up serious questions of how do we mobilize funding quickly to respond to them? How do we mobilize the flow of information to the people who need it? Can we use existing legislation like the Endangered Species Act to respond, or do we need to create new kinds of legislation to deal with these disasters and the threat to biodiversity they represent? And perhaps most importantly, with these kinds of disasters happening more frequently, how do we thoughtfully prioritize which disasters receive attention, people, funding, instead of letting whichever disaster is best publicized decide for us? So I will freely admit that I am a young scientist, and I most definitely do not have answers to most of these questions that I'm posing. Rather, I just think that there are things that our communities need to start grappling with and planning for. I do, however, have a few thoughts on answering one of these questions specifically, kind of in response to what we learned with the sunflower star. And that is, how do we mobilize the flow of information around these disasters to the people who need it? And being one of the folks that was handling all of the data surrounding this ecological disaster, I can say that a good start would be to enhance our long-term monitoring programs. So when we were trying to make data sets fit together that were collected in 3 different nations, a dozen states, 33 data contributors, and 40 degrees of latitude. Coordinating data collection across states and countries in order to standardize the data that we're taking, or at least think about potential downstream uses of it, could help avoid some of the slowness of just trying to integrate all of this data. We hear a lot of cool stuff going on in terms of data integration and data storage that are happening with the West Coast Ocean Alliance, which is exciting to hear about. 2, we need to think beyond just taking data on the presence and the number of each species. Taking data that speak to biological or ecological processes, things like organism size, reproductive status, health status, that can give us a lot more power in understanding disasters. For instance, if my team had information from even a few places, about sunflower sea star like size, like the individual size the size of individual organisms before and after the epidemic, we could have said a lot more about whether the populations in those fragile northern remnant populations were recovering, stable, or continuing to decline. And last, we need to increase the area and frequency with which we're sampling. An easy way to do that is to connect with people who are already out there taking data or using the ocean. So I'd just like to point out that in our study, of the 42,000 surveys that we used, probably half of those came from community science organizations. So coordinating across organizations, silos, occupations, can avoid duplication, increase the coverage of our data, and make the best use of community scientists' time. So this is where I'm going to go ahead and wrap up, folks. I want to thank you all so much for making time to come share your attention with me and learn about the case of the sunflower sea star. And I'd like to thank also so many of the folks that were involved in making this work happen, both Sarah Gravam, Deanna Sacamano, Walter Hetty from the Nature Conservancy, as well as all of our data contributors and other collaborators over on the right. So with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up. And thank you all again so much for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. A lot of good info there, and appreciate you packing it in. That's really fantastic to hear about. We did get one question in. We're just about at time to start the next presentation. So I will say, can you give a 30-second answer to the question of how does climate change commit to the demise of the sea star, which is not an easy one, but I don't know if you have any quick thoughts.
Quick thoughts. There's a lot of controversy in the scientific data about it, but based on a lot of evidence, I think it's very likely that heat waves and increased temperatures had something to do with weaponizing this pandemic and making it spread across an entire continent so quickly. But there are a lot of complexities with it. So again, it's one of those hard to figure out, involves indirect effects of humans. We still don't even know what the disease is. So likely, but the exact mechanism is unknown.
Great. Fantastic 30-second answer. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mark. And yeah, Mark, we can connect you with Sarah too offline to get a little bit more insight there. But that was great. Thank you so much, Sarah. So Tom, I will tee you up next to shift over to kelp. So I'll let you take it from there.
All right. I think I'm sharing my screen now, so you guys should see my presentation any second.
Looks great.
I see thumbs up. So, first of all, I just want to say you're a hard act to follow, Sarah. It was a great presentation and a perfect lead-in for this one. And I should note that Sarah and I are working together as members of the Oregon Kelp Alliance, which is what I'm going to talk about. My name is Tom Calvanese. I work for Oregon State University as the manager of the Port Orford Field Station under the Marine Studies Initiative, and I'm also the coordinator for the Oregon Kelp Alliance. And what I'm going to be talking to you about is a little bit about the Oregon Kelp Alliance and focusing primarily on a kelp forest restoration project that we're just now getting underway. Before I do that, I just want to acknowledge where I am right now, which is right behind me. I don't know if you can see it, is a place that is currently known as Battle Rock, which is actually known by the First Nations folks here as, I'm going to probably butcher the name, but Manasaha, I believe it said, and it was known as the mussel gathering place for obvious reasons. And this was the land of the Tututni indigenous people, and we are currently working with members of the Coquel tribe and the confederated tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, and look forward to deepening those partnerships and working with other coastal tribes on this important work. So into the Oregon Kelp Alliance, this is a diverse set of folks with diverse interests in kelp forest ecosystems, from urchin divers to tribal members, scientists, conservationists, eco-tour guides, sport divers, chefs even, and other folks. And the common interest, of course, is in healthy kelp forests and, of course, Oregon. So this group came about, really was triggered by commercial urchin divers who started to see changes in the subtidal environment that they were working in the kelp forests where they were harvesting sea urchins. And what you see here is a healthy harvest of red sea urchins on the Mach 1, which is the primary urchin diving vessel in Oregon. To the left and to the right, Orford Reef which is probably the largest kelp forest environment in Oregon, just offshore Port Orford, where I am. And the urchin divers have not worked at Orford Reef for the last couple of years because of the loss of marketable sea urchin. And we'll talk about why. And Sarah touched on this, so I'm going to lead with it. And that is the what came to be known as the warm blob that had a massive effect on oceanic systems in this region, and of course on kelp forest ecosystems. And Sarah covered very well the story of the Pycnopodia or sunflower sea star. Here's a bunch of healthy ones doing their thing. And here's one that's suffering from the wasting disease. And Sarah covered how they play a role in kelp forest ecosystems vis-a-vis urchin populations. So thanks for covering that, Sarah. And also shared this, which was a study looking at Northern California and the loss of healthy kelp forests there. And of course, here in Southern Oregon, we share a lot of similarities in terms of that rocky habitat kelp forest ecosystem, and began to see those effects here as well. Here in Oregon, we had historically done aerial kelp surveys, excuse me, ODFW primarily. And here you're seeing the results of those surveys between 1990 and 2011, showing healthy kelp coverage and forest at Orford Reef, also at Orford Heads and the Redfish Rocks Marine Reserve and MPA and along the coast there. And I'm pointing out two places, Nellie's Cove and Titchener Cove, which I'm going to be talking about in more detail. So you can kind of orient to where they are and the sort of kelp coverage that was there historically. Note that we have not done aerial kelp surveys in Oregon since 2011, and that's something that we're working on right now. So to share some data with you on shifting now to talking about urchins, these are some data from surveys that were done by ODFW in partnership with commercial urchin divers, showing a very significant increase in 2018-19 in particular, where we just saw a massive explosion of purple sea urchins in particular, but reds as well. The graph at the top are the surveys done at Orford Reef, and the one at the bottom are those done at Redfish Rocks. The scales are different, but particularly the one at Orford Reef, you can see a very, very high density, above 6 urchins per square meter, which is a very large number. So here's a shot of Nellie's Cove from 2017, taken during an eco tour by one of our partners, South Coast Tours. And it's showing you some healthy kelp coverage there. That's not bull kelp, but there's quite a number of different kelp species. But here in 2020, in adjacent Titchener Cove, we started to see things that looked more like this. Very high densities of purple sea urchins, and as Sarah pointed out, they're heavy grazers on kelp and managed to graze down almost all of the kelp in that region. So our group came together with several different groups of divers, scientific divers, divers trained by Reef Check to conduct surveys, as well as sport divers, underwater photographers, last October, to lay down the baseline monitoring that will be needed to examine the area prior to doing any interventions. And these surveys were done at Nellie's Cove. That was the site that we chose as our first location. And so here's what we found in those surveys that were conducted again by Reef Check trained divers. You're seeing 6 transects within each of those sites. We're using Nellie's Cove is sort of conveniently divided into 2. So we're using a before-after control treatment study design. And the results, there are other results, but the pertinent results for this talk were high densities of purple sea urchins and no kelp. And here I'm just sharing the details about Reef Check. Recently trained 7 new Oregon divers, and also just recently hired a part-time coordinator for their efforts in Oregon. So they're really coming to the table as a good partner on this work, particularly in terms of doing this survey work. So very rapidly, this project sort of expanded because divers in other locations were identifying other locations where they were seeing similar effects. And so we now are looking at a 5-site project, 2 sites on the north coast, Cape Lookout and Haystack Rock in Pacific City, Cape Arago at South Cove at Cape Arago. You already saw Nelly's Cove at Orford Heads, and Macklin Cove in Brookings on the south coast. And I'm just going to show you some maps of those sites and how we've sort of laid out our experiments in terms of control and treatment sites. So here it is at Cape Lookout. This is the Haystack Rock site. This is in Pacific City again. It's not the famous Haystack Rock. Somehow they have 2 of them. This is interesting. We did some reconnaissance dives. Actually, Sarah and I were on this together. And we were looking at the South Cove at Cape Arago and found this really interesting juxtaposition where we have very high densities of purple sea urchins just adjacent to some very thick kelp beds. So we're looking closely at that as part of the project. And here are the maps for the South Cove site. And I just showed you the ones for Nelly's Cove. And here are the maps for the Macklin Cove site. Again, we're using 2 adjacent areas and comparing them, removing urchins in one, not the other, and then comparing the effects. So this project is being conducted under an ODFW scientific take permit that will enable us to cull urchins in areas where the surveys reveal that there is an overpopulation of urchins and it's affecting the kelp. And again, it's a controlled compact design at those 5 sites, and there'll be local coordinators for divers at each of the sites. The surveys will include purple and red sea urchins, kelp, red and flat abalone, and the sunflower sea star that Sarah was just talking about. We'll also be looking to subsample the purple sea urchins to look at their reproductive status, seasonality of their reproduction, and we'll also be deploying dissolved oxygen sensors to measure the potential effects on oxygen levels, because we'll be culling urchins in place, and so we want to pay attention to the effects of that. So that's what I have to share. Here's some information about how to contact the Oregon Kelp Alliance, how to contact me. There's my work mobile phone number. Feel free to call me. You can follow us on social media at Oregon Kelp. And actually just today, OPB has released a second in their series called Super Abundant, which is talking about Oregon foods. And this episode is going to feature the purple sea urchin. So I will drop the link to the YouTube of this, and you can all enjoy the story about purple sea urchins and all the things we've been talking about, and how some of that uni might end up on a plate somewhere nearby where you are sometime soon. So I'm going to stop there, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them if I can.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom. Appreciate it. We're just about again on time here for the next talk to start. But I will see just one question that came in about expanding urchin fishery as part of kelp recovery. Is that something you can speak to maybe real briefly?
Sure. Really quickly, I should share that I actually worked as a sea urchin diver while I was doing my degree here in Port Orford. So I spent a lot of time out there and still connected with the urchin fishery in that way. The problem is that once the urchins, these purple urchins in particular, have grazed down kelp, they've sort of eliminated their food source and become sort of starved and enter a sort of state of torpor. We sometimes refer to them as zombie urchins. Unfortunately, the valuable part of the urchin is their uni or gonads, which kind of shrivel up when they are starved in that starved condition. So the way we're tackling that is actually launching some some urchin cultivation work, using cultivated seaweed to feed urchins and fatten up their uni so they can be brought to market. And you'll see some of that in the super abundant piece. And then of course, you'll see that unfold as it develops further. So great question. Unfortunately, empty urchins are not good for the market.
Great. Thanks for addressing that one. So we'll move on to the next one, but thank you so much, Tom. Great talk. And I think you get the gold star for best view of the Zoom presentation, at least in your background there to for presenters today so far. Thanks again very much. So now we will shift over to a couple talks on offshore wind, which is another very timely topic. And maybe I will tee up Sarah C. About her discussion of offshore wind wildlife workshop and study work. So Sarah, I will let you screen share and then take it from there. And you are muted, Sarah, right now. So just want to confirm that. We can see your screen perfectly, but not getting your audio yet. You're still muted, Sarah. I can try to unmute if that helps.
Sorry, I can't, for whatever reason, I can't see the screen that I can unmute on when I have the thing sharing. So I'm gonna try sharing again.
Great, no worries. There we go.
Is that all right?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, excellent. All right. So my screen is up here, so I'm going to be glancing off a little bit to the side. But yes, thank you. I'm going to shift topics here a little bit and talk about offshore wind. I am Sarah Corbis, and I work for Advisian, which is part of the Worley Group. And just as a quick introduction to myself, I originally started in marine sciences back in the 90s. My first real work out of college was at Hatfield Marine Science Center. And I worked in Bruce Mate's lab for a couple of years. And then I worked for the EPA doing estuarine ecology out in Yaquina Bay. And this picture up in the corner is what we used to have to use to get GPS coordinates for something. Very large antennas and geodetic point and all kinds of stuff. So things have come a long way since then. Subsequent to that, I did a master's degree with San Francisco State University studying the effects of swimmers and vessels on dolphins in bays that rest in bays in Hawaii, and then followed that up with a PhD at Portland State. Came back to Oregon and still studying Hawaiian animals. So did a study of genetic populations of pantropical spotted dolphins in Hawaii, and did some photo ID work as well. And then after I finished my PhD, I went to work for the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources in their humpback whale sanctuary program, but Oregon called me back again, and I moved back to Oregon, and I've been working in environmental consulting for the last 8 years or so, based here in Portland, Oregon. So a lot of the focus of my work is on offshore wind and other types of offshore renewables. I've done a little bit of analysis on marine hydrokinetics projects here on the West Coast too. But the company I work for now has a very broad expertise in offshore wind. They're really kind of it's a large scale engineering firm. It's sort of a soup to nuts on these types of offshore infrastructure projects. So we have a lot of experience in the UK. And I've been sort of trying to bring everybody's expertise to bear on some of these questions about potential impacts of offshore wind. So I wanted to share with you today a few projects that we are working on that I thought might be of interest to the stakeholders at West Coast Ocean Alliance, and that folks might want to talk to me about later too. And I'd be excited to have people reach out. And I enjoyed the recent presentation. I think that actually is a group that I need to talk to. So a couple of things that we're working on, the National Offshore Wind Research and Development Consortium has provided a grant to us in collaboration with the Biodiversity Research Institute to evaluate sort of what kinds of to inform the types of technology that we need or technology gaps that we have in order to collect long-term monitoring data that can actually answer questions surrounding offshore wind impacts. So one of the problems is you say, we'll go collect 3 years of data, but that's not really, you need a question. You need to think about what type of data would answer that question, how much data you need to have statistically robust outcomes, where you need to use proxies, what's logistically feasible. All these kinds of things are part of assessing how to make long-term monitoring really work. Also how it can integrate into the operations of offshore wind. So it's going to be hard to send a bunch of dedicated vessels out 10 miles offshore. What can we do to integrate some of these monitoring techniques into the infrastructure of offshore wind and the vessels that are going out there already for various types of maintenance of wind farms? And part of the point of that is to inform the technology. Part of it is also to inform adaptive management. And I have a little graphic here that I've made up about adaptive management. But effectively, you really have to have a problem or a question and then set some kind of criteria or thresholds. And you need to have some way to collect data that's going to allow you to assess whether you've met those thresholds and need to take some sort of an action or need to change something in future projects. And that's the disconnect that a lot of people have. You can make all kinds of long-term monitoring programs, but if you're not actually able to use the data to reduce the uncertainty that you already have and help you hone in on where you need to increase or decrease mitigation or focus your energy, it's not as helpful. So we're focusing our project on that, and that project is West Coast and East Coast based. We have developers like Magellan Wind and Ørsted working with us on this too. So we are certainly excited about having different partners who are interested in working with us on this. We're planning to base this mainly on, we're doing some desktop study, but also workshops with experts to do some expert elicitation for this project. In addition, another project that we're working on is in collaboration with the Natural Resources Defense Council. We're doing a workshop on marine mammals and West Coast wind. So this is specifically West Coast based. And the point of this is really sort of the getting started on some of the collaborations that we could have with West Coast marine mammal researchers. So very focused on the science in this case. On the East Coast, we've learned that these regional collaborations are going to be really important and are really important to answering questions and assessing impacts. And we know that, there's some groups starting up on the West Coast, like the Power Group, Pacific Ocean Wind Energy Research Group, and the ROSA folks may be engaging more on the West Coast, which are the Responsible Offshore Science Alliance, which is part of the fisheries studies. So we want to start getting the marine mammal researchers more engaged, setting up collaborations. If everybody's in their little silo, all fighting for the dollars, you don't always get the best outcomes. If people can come together and find points of collaboration and build larger and more productive projects together, we think that's going to be really helpful and help us understand where we might, prioritize our energy. There's also a lot of calls coming out for proposals to do studies, baseline studies. There's a lot of data out there, as a number of folks pointed out in the previous talks. What kind of happens if you don't direct some of these things with questions is to have people say, well, I'm doing this work in my lab already. Does it fit that category? Can I, can I help fund more of the research I'm already doing? And maybe it's really very offshore wind related, but maybe it's not. And so if we can help people direct questions, actually do directed research for the purpose of answering questions associated with offshore wind impacts, we think that would be really valuable. So we're going to start building those collaborations, hopefully, as part of this work. And then I wanted to touch on, finally, a study that we're doing in New York, which isn't focused on the West Coast, but we're really interested in starting to work on similar types of studies here on the West Coast. And this is looking at actual dynamic habitat relationships with animal distributions. One of the problems we have is using hindcast data and just saying, well, if animals were here most of the time in the last 20 years, here's where they're going to be, isn't necessarily accurate. As again, the other speakers have pointed out, there have been changes in the environment. The dynamic variables that drive animal movements and use patterns aren't necessarily the same as they were 20 years ago or on average over the last 20 years. So we use the data from the historical information to understand better what the hydrodynamics are of the environment, and can use the information from mid-ocean data, which one of the speakers talked about as well, use that type of data to create hydrodynamic models. But then we can use observations of animals that are concurrent with environmental data collection to look at how animals prefer certain types of dynamic habitats, not just like there's a substrate that they might be over, but actual dynamic changes like temperature and currents and things like that. And then that helps us be able to better predict where we expect animals to be for siting of wind farms, over like long periods, or looking at in the moment sort of things like mitigating for a particular construction project in certain conditions. And these types of work are right now being sponsored by the state of New York, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. We're working on several species of flora that are shown here. And we're also overlaying for some of that some animal movement models where you actually try, you simulate individual animals in space and their movement patterns, either short-term, like with a tidal cycle, or long-term, moving, migrating baleen whales, for example. So we think there's a lot of potential for this work on the West Coast because there are a lot of data. The question, the information that came up in one of the previous talks about collecting more data and getting out there, understanding what the sensitive variables are in the models of these types of animals could be really helpful to informing what mid-ocean data and environmental data needs we have, how much of those data do we need to have good models that we feel confident in. So that coordination between the modelers and the people who are collecting data out in the environment is really crucial to getting good outcomes and reducing uncertainty in models. So these are some of the things that we're working on. And this is a very brief overview, and we have a number of other projects that we're involved in, but I would love to connect with people who are interested in these projects. And my email address is here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that folks may have if I have any time left.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Appreciate you running through that. And I know, again, very high level, but a lot of good work happening and really exciting to see these pieces moving ahead. I may keep us moving to the next talk just to try to keep us on time. But if folks do have any questions for Sarah, obviously you can use the chat here and we'll track that. And Sarah, feel free to follow up there. But also Sarah's email is on screen, and folks can definitely get in touch to learn more about their efforts on a lot of those fronts, which is great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. So keeping on the topic here of offshore wind, why don't we switch over to Katie? Katie, if you're available to maybe shift from Sarah's screen to yours, I will let you bring that up and then maybe introduce yourself and take it from there.
Yes, one moment. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, great. I know we're having that same issue that we had earlier with the sharing of the screens. Are you able to see my screen?
I can see your screen. Yep. And it's in your notes mode now, so it's not in presentation mode. There we go. Looks great.
That worked. Okay, great. Good morning, good afternoon. I am Catherine White, an offshore environmental specialist with also Advisian, who Sarah was just talking about, to present floating offshore wind and ocean users, unknowns, potential interactions, and opportunities for coordinated research and siting. A little bit about me. I am Catherine White. I was raised in Colorado. I got my degree in ecology evolutionary biology, and then eventually went over to England to get more marine environmental management experience and the master's. I then worked for a while in the Dutch Caribbean and Central and South America, working with stakeholders and fisheries representatives. I then came back to America, and I've been working as a fisheries biologist for the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, working in salmon, and then moved over here to Portland about 2 years ago, where I've been working in environmental consulting and working in the offshore space as an environmental specialist. For today, we will go over West Coast ocean users, West Coast fishing gear, floating offshore wind designs, inter-array cable configurations, floating offshore wind footprints for interaction zones, the need for targeted research, and research and monitoring opportunities. The ocean is a busy place. This map shows the automatic identification system known as AIS of all vessels using this area on the West Coast in 2019. This includes shipping, transportation, military use, fishing, and more. One ocean user I would like to highlight is fisheries. This map shows the catch of commercial fisheries off of California. Significant catch landings are fished from coastal, shallower areas and also open water offshore areas. The Pacific off the West Coast offers habitat, migratory routes, and feeding areas for many critical species that we harvest. As you can see from this map of California fishing gear use, much of the coastal areas is commercial, mobile benthic gear to target species in the benthic environment, such as flounder, sole, and Pacific halibut. This type of gear can be bottom trawl and bottom longline. The picture in blue is an example of bottom longline. The marine space farther offshore in the pelagic zone uses commercial pelagic fishing gear to target migratory and open water species, such as albacore, billfish, and tunas. This type of gear can be mid-water trawl and purse seines. The picture in purple is an example of mid-water trawl. As an example, here is a map of days trawling for albacore, a pelagic species using pelagic fishing gear in the offshore space. There is significant fishing effort of this type in the north off of Washington and Oregon in the open water. There are uncertainties around floating offshore wind technology, ocean user interactions, biological impacts, and benefits. There are multiple platform designs and anchor options for floating offshore wind. 3 popular designs are the spar, the tension leg, and the semi-submersible platform, each with different anchor and attachment options, as seen in the above figure. Depending on the depth of the seafloor, both the spar and the semi-submersible could extend out and increase the radius of an interaction zone with ocean users in the water column. There are multiple designs for cable distribution from the turbine, such as the dynamic cable figure in the bottom left, which would include an intermediate buoy to lift up the cable, adding more area to the potential interaction zone with ocean users. Both the catenary and taut-leg system show the variety of anchor design options. The anchor and cable radius changes with each technology type. Some designs could have a smaller radius, but could also potentially interact with more ocean users vertically in the water column. Depending on the attachment site, anchors could impact benthic environments and benthic users. There are various interarray cable configurations for floating offshore wind. As you can see in the figures, interarray cables connect between the turbines. They can be buried or suspended in the water column, depending on the depth and substrate. A 3-dimensional footprint needs to be made for the configuration and anchor options to indicate ocean user interaction zones. As multiple designs and configurations are being assessed, ocean users need to be at the table as decisions are being made that impact how and where they use the marine space. Ocean users have the opportunity to be a part of the conversation around floating offshore wind designs, configurations, mitigations to increase access, and siting. Regional coordination is needed across academia, agencies, disciplines, states, developers, and environmental NGOs. Subject matter experts need to identify the research priorities and risk questions for floating offshore wind on the West Coast. There's a need to assess if current research can provide that knowledge, and also to work with agencies to design targeted and timely research that can lead to scientific answers on potential floating offshore wind risk to the environment. Offshore wind call areas are significantly smaller than fishing grounds. There are research and monitoring opportunities as floating offshore wind will have maintenance vessels offering long-term area access. Technology will continue to innovate, allowing for many opportunities. Technology could allow for underwater sensing capabilities to monitor structures for gear entanglement. Operators could execute a removal procedure potentially before gear interacts with marine life. Floating offshore wind could increase the local workforce and further develop ports as more support is needed. The time is now to collaborate and answer research questions for floating offshore wind. Coordination among ocean user groups, developers, researchers, and agencies will streamline siting and wind farm mitigation to minimize biological and socioeconomic impacts. Science is being conducted to acknowledge stakeholder concerns, provide answers, detail benefits, correct misunderstandings, and offer mitigation and/or management recommendations, which translates the work being done and identifies future research needed to ensure responsible development of floating offshore wind. West Coast floating offshore wind can learn from past industry successes, adapt programs to be more inclusive, learn from mistakes, and achieve ocean user coexistence. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thanks so much, Katie. That was a great overview, and again, complicated topic, but something I know a lot of folks on the West Coast are tracking very closely. We're just about on time, even now, maybe a couple minutes ahead. So let me pause to see if there were any questions here that I can pass along. I do see one that just came in asking around job differential in a construction mode versus operational mode on offshore wind. Is that one you can speak to briefly?
Well, that really is unique and depends on the project. Of course, there are different services available for construction versus operation and maintenance. And those are usually quite unique depending on how the developer and how agencies choose to work through that. I'm not sure I can really answer that from a fisheries perspective.
Yeah, that does seem like a complicated one and maybe more project specific, but possibly one we could follow up with offline as well. Great. Well, thank you, Katie. Appreciate it. Again, your contact info is there, and something we're excited to continue to track. As mentioned, the Alliance is tracking this as well, and something we'll be continuing to discuss, but definitely interested to see where this work goes on all the fronts you mentioned, and we will continue to stay in touch. Great. So I'm going to just tee up here in a moment. Our next discussion, shifting away from offshore wind to orcas, which is a really interesting topic, obviously, to maybe get Colleen ready to share her screen to give her talk. I will just mention while we have a moment here to folks that maybe have joined late, that if you'd like, you can use the chat box to put your name and affiliation in, as we are trying to keep track of attendees today and capture that as well. So if you weren't here at the start, name and affiliation in the chat box would be great. And we're also using that for questions as they come up. But with that, let's shift to orcas, and Colleen, I will let you take it from here.
All right. Hi, everybody. I am going to just start talking while I get my screen share set up. So thanks for having me. Happy to be here. My name is Colleen Weiler. I'm the Jessica Ricos Fellow for Orca Conservation for Whale and Dolphin Conservation. And happy to join everyone and talk about orcas. This endangered population, the Southern resident community, is really thought of as Washington whales or Puget Sound orcas a lot of the time. But they really are West Coast orcas, and one of the most well-known and well-studied whale populations in the world. So they're not only icons of the Pacific, but they're also a clear indicator of the health of the ocean and the nearshore ecosystem. And a little bit about where we're coming from with this. Whale and Dolphin Conservation is the leading global charity dedicated to the protection of whales and dolphins and the recovery of endangered populations. We work through education and outreach, campaigns and advocacy, and research and policy efforts to create a world where every whale and dolphin is safe and free. We have offices around the globe. Our North American office is actually over in Plymouth, Massachusetts, but I'm happy to be working remotely from Newport, Oregon, and be our West Coast rep and cover all the Pacific issues on the West Coast here. So a little background on the Southern residents for any folks who might not be familiar with them. They are a unique community in the resident, which is the fish-eating ecotype of killer whale or orca. They don't interbreed and really don't interact with any other types or populations of orcas, even within that resident ecotype. So they are a distinct genetic population, and they have their own unique behaviors, dialects, food preferences, and even foraging strategies that are specific just to the Southern resident community. They're highly social, and they stay in long-term stable family groups that are led by elder females. and both male and female offspring stay with or are closely associated with their mother for her entire life. And those elder females play a really important role in the survival of their family groups through carrying and passing down information to younger generations, as well as directly supporting the survival of their family groups through finding and sharing of prey. They are the only population of orcas in US waters to be listed under the Endangered Species Act, and they were listed in 2005 following a 20% population decline in the late 90s. There are currently 75 in the wild. There is one in captivity. We like to just recognize her. And that is down from 89 when they were listed 16 years ago, 71 in the 1970s when they were first identified as a distinct population. And historical estimates are anywhere from 150 to 200 individuals in the population. So they are well below what they once were. The whales have been studied and surveyed, as I said, since the 1970s, and historical sightings outside of the waters of the Salish Sea, as I said, they're most often identified as Washington whales, have been pretty scarce, but dedicated research since that ESA listing through satellite tagging, through dedicated observation surveys, and passive acoustic monitoring has confirmed that they range from Northern California to Southeast Alaska. And primarily, so they really are West Coast whales. The Salish Sea is their primary summer and fall home, but they are traveling the outer coast of Northern California, generally Monterey Bay, up the coast of Oregon and Washington to around southern Vancouver Island in the winter and early spring. And that same research that established where they were at what times of the year was able to collect some additional information on what they're eating when they're out there. And supported previous observations of them overlapping in time and space with big returns of Chinook salmon. So that research shows that Chinook can be nearly 100% of their diet in the spring when they are coming back to and around the Salish Sea, eating salmon from the Fraser River, about 50% in the fall when they're in Puget Sound, and 70 to 80% in the winter and early spring when they are traversing those coastal waters off of all of the West Coast states there. So their diet can be supplemented by other types of fish, primarily other types of salmon, coho and chum. Chinook is really what they have evolved to specialize on. And it's no surprise given that Chinook are the largest and fattiest type of salmon and a really important part of their nutritional portfolio. And their movements throughout that habitat really overlap with what were the historic returns of Chinook salmon to take advantage of those abundant pulses in prey as the Chinook were coming back to those rivers of origin, especially the mouth of the Columbia in the late winter and early spring, the Salish Sea in the late spring and early summer, and then kind of more dispersed around the coast in the wintertime. So it should also come as no surprise that as Chinook have declined through California and the Pacific Northwest, the orcas have followed, and prey depletion is a top threat to their survival and recovery. Without enough Chinook, they are not getting the nutrients that they need. They are additionally impacted by persistent chemicals, the legacy contaminants, DDT and PCBs, as well as new ones that we don't really know what the impacts of those are yet, such as flame retardants that can bioaccumulate through the food web and end up in the blubber of these top predators. In addition, human use of the coastal habitat has really been increasing, especially in the last 50, 60 years or so. So a lot of noise and disturbance can make it harder for them to communicate and to find that food, can cause disturbance or displacement. And then they're at additional risk of just the small population size. Any disease outbreak would be pretty scary for the southern residents. Inbreeding impacts and catastrophic events like an oil spill would potentially have a huge impact on this small community. And all of these threats, unfortunately, act together in cumulative impacts, so they can exacerbate the effects of each other. And we're really seeing those effects, especially in recent years, with research showing poor body condition, a condition called peanut head, which is a lack of fat. And you can actually see the skull in the shape of the whale. Lower adult lengths in recent generations. They're not growing to be as big as they used to be. And a pregnancy failure rate of 69%, with a third of those pregnancies lost in the late stages. And over the time frame of the survey on this population, so since the 1970s, their trajectory has pretty closely followed the coastwide Chinook abundance, with declines in Chinook coming right before some increases in mortality rates, with a little bit of lag in the southern resident population. In recent years, the number of orcas has dipped so low that deaths are a little bit more random and less closely track that Chinook abundance, but they still have really high mortality rates. And in unexpected age classes, we're losing juveniles and middle-aged females who should still have 30 to 40 years of life left. Recovery efforts happened pretty quickly after they were listed, starting with critical habitat and some vessel regulations. And then there was kind of a big gap in the name of data collection to learn a little bit more about, again, that coastal distribution and diet, and what else is needed to protect the whales. And in response to another significant population decline between 2015 and 2018, some additional efforts were launched, including a Washington State task force, identifying a priority stock list of Chinook, and some additional measures in Canada. But a lot of those actions, both initial after they were listed under the ESA and more recent ones, have really largely focused in Washington and Canada in that Salish Sea area. And we're still a little bit slow to get things started in Oregon and California and throughout the rest of their range. So some region-wide actions such as fisheries planning and that priority stock list have happened, but they certainly still need more to go on throughout the rest of their habitat. So a little bit of the specific actions that we're working on as an organization. We are working collaboratively with other groups that are working on various issues, including salmon recovery, watershed health, and water quality issues through the Orca Salmon Alliance, which is a coalition of organizations that also has a pretty heavy Washington bias. And it would be great to add some more Oregon and California groups to that, working on all of these different issues that do impact salmon and the whales. We're providing information to federal members of Congress as well as local governments, especially here in Oregon, to kind of highlight that connection and talk about what more we can do a little further south in their range to help the recovery of these whales. And then weighing in on common opportunities where we can to point out the connection. We've done a lot of work on river restoration and dam removal to help support salmon recovery. And then similarly doing a lot of public outreach to get more people just aware of these whales, understand their story and how they can participate in their recovery. And it is Orca Month right now. June is Orca Month in Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. So go to orcamonth.com and join some events. And some general needs, more sightings effort. Passive acoustic monitoring takes a long time, unfortunately, to download and collect that data, and more real-time observations and sightings would be hugely helpful, just to keep an eye on the whales, know when and where they are, how they're doing. Speeding up salmon restoration work, obviously important for communities, tribes, fisheries, whales as well. More consideration of the orcas and coastal ecosystem in rivers and watersheds. And I know I'm coming up on time, so I'll just give a quick shout out to the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, which have recently requested an Orca and Salmon Summit at some point this summer, which would be a really great opportunity to start talking about a more coordinated effort in the region. And any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Any interest in getting involved and yeah, any opportunities to get the orcas considered in any of those things, please let me know.
Great. Thanks, Colleen. Great overview. And again, we'll pass along Colleen's contact info, and really excited to hear about all of that work, but especially future meetings and opportunities for collaboration, as I know this is something a lot of people track closely, and to see the intersection with some other topics would be really fascinating to dig into. I'll pause just to see if there were any questions coming in at this point, and otherwise folks feel free to use the chat box as we continue to make sure we can connect follow-ups there as well as passing along Colleen's slides and contact info. All right, I'm not seeing any yet, so we'll keep an eye on that, but maybe shift over to the final presentation here to keep on time. But thank you so much, Colleen, for the presentation. Appreciate having you. Great. So last but not least, we have our group from San Diego. So heading from the north down to the south, covering our full West Coast region here. I'm really glad that we've stayed on time, appreciative of our speakers sticking to time here really effectively. I was worried our San Diego group would get the short shrift here at the end, but we are pretty much on time. So Lily and Eileen, I will let you take it from here. It looks like your screen is up, so it's looking great. And I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And really great presentations today, learning so much. And thank you all for the opportunity to present today. My name is Lily Tsukayama, an associate planner at the Port of San Diego, and I'm joined today by Eileen Maher, Director of Environmental Conservation and Aquaculture and Blue Technology at the Port. And today we will give a high-level overview of several of our blue economy and environmental initiatives that we're advancing here in San Diego, as well as emphasizing the importance of partnerships and collaboration, which are at the heart of all of these efforts. So here's our presentation agenda. I'll give a brief background on the Port of San Diego, and then Eileen will talk about blue innovation and nature-based solutions. So this is a map of the Port of San Diego. We are a public benefit corporation established in 1962, and we are the 4th largest port in California. Our jurisdiction includes state tidelands, which are in orange on the map, and submerged tidelands, which are in blue in and around San Diego Bay. And our jurisdiction spans across areas within our 5 member cities: San Diego, National City, Chula Vista, Imperial Beach, and Coronado. While we are a strategic port with a lot of maritime uses, we also manage a wide variety of other uses such as parks, piers, public art, hotels, and events. And the port provides many public benefits by protecting and ensuring coastal access across our tidelands so that all visitors can enjoy being here. Here's a sampling of some of our ongoing plans and policies that we've developed over the years at the Port of San Diego. Just 2 that I wanted to highlight on this slide are the preliminary assessment report for the San Diego Ocean Planning Partnership, which we prepared in collaboration with the State Lands Commission, and the Integrated Natural Resources Management Plan, which we prepared in collaboration with the Navy. The preparation of all of these plans and policies is not possible without stakeholder and public engagement, as well as collaborative stewardship of San Diego Bay. And we'd like to thank our partners, as well as everyone who is participating in or has participated in these efforts. So now that you're a bit more familiar with the Port of San Diego, I will pass the presentation over to Eileen. Eileen, you're on mute.
It looks like maybe she's by phone and we're muted now. I can try to help unmute if that would be of assistance. Eileen, if you're by the 619 phone, you can hit *6 on your phone to unmute. There we go. That might work. Still not hearing it. It looks like your line is unmuted. I don't know if your headset might be. Still not hearing it yet. Lily, I just want to make sure I'm not missing it. If you're not hearing it as well, I just want to double check.
No, I don't hear you either, Eileen.
So
yes.
There we
does that
go.
work?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. So, thank you, Lily, and good morning, everyone. Next, I'd like to share with you the progress we're making as a catalyst for our blue innovation through our Blue Economy Incubator. As the secretary of our board, Rafael Castellanos likes to say, the Port of San Diego's leadership in the blue economy is well established with our cargo, shipbuilding, and fishing industries, and now we are leading the way to facilitate the next generation of opportunities on our dynamic waterfront. Our aquaculture and blue technology program aims to remove barriers to entry and facilitate development of emerging sustainable aquaculture and port-related blue tech innovation projects in and around San Diego Bay. As the state legislated trustee of tidelands and submerged lands, developing sustainable domestic aquaculture and supporting port-related blue tech businesses, assists in fulfilling the port's public trust responsibility to promote commerce, fisheries, navigation, recreation, and commerce, as well as aligning with its mission to enhance and protect the environment. Making the port uniquely positioned to facilitate projects by providing key assets and services to support the launch of pilot projects, such as subject matter expertise, permit-ready infrastructure, entitlement assistance, marine spatial planning tools, market access, and strategic funding. So currently, our Blue Economy Incubator portfolio includes 9 local, national, and international businesses. And these projects offer multiple co-benefits, including environmentally friendly shoreline infrastructure, restorative aquaculture, and water and sediment remediation benefits. This slide shows where in the bay these projects are located, and the business country of origin, and a breakdown of the pilot projects by type. So to further our incubator, the port has developed numerous important partnerships. In fact, this week, our board approved an MOU with Canada's Ocean Supercluster to coordinate blue economy projects. We've also partnered with NOAA to complete a spatial opportunity analysis, both within the bay and offshore, to look at aquaculture opportunities. And for decades, we have partnered with the US Navy to manage our natural resources in the bay. With this plan having a goal of multiple co-benefits, which help develop our pilot projects. And this slide shows you just 2 of our recent partnerships with Sunken Seed and eConcrete. And eConcrete is a nature-based solution mimicking tide pools to create habitat, which can potentially, hopefully, replace shoreline riprap structures. And these are just a few of our partnerships we have formed over time. So next, we want to share our Blue Economy Incubator pilot projects, which also support nature-based climate solutions. These projects include creation of a wetlands mitigation bank out of a former salt evaporation pond, a living shorelines project, the tide pool infrastructures, which I just discussed, and restorative aquaculture. Additionally, we are also looking at blue carbon sequestration in our existing natural habitats and future created habitats. Based on a partnership with the Middlebury Institute in Monterey, we're working with graduate students who are conducting a quantitative assessment of blue carbon in San Diego Bay and looking at the amount of carbon sequestration which can be held in eelgrass and wetlands habitats. Underutilized and degraded property is also ideal for a wetlands creation to assist with carbon sequestration. By creating new wetlands and habitat within existing upland landscapes, this creates greater long-term carbon sequestration on underutilized lands. So in the development of our wetlands mitigation bank, we conducted pre-restoration greenhouse gas accounting assessment so that we can quantify the amount of carbon we expect to be sequestered as a result of creating the wetlands. This study indicated that a 189% increase of carbon would be sequestered by the year 2100 as compared to no restoration performed at all. In addition to carbon sequestration, other ecosystem services result from the wetlands creation, including, of course, natural water quality improvements, shoreline erosion control, flood protection, and valuable habitat for both fish and avian species. We are also looking at other opportunities to grow a variety of restorative species, such as shellfish and seaweed, together in the same space, using the entire water column, commonly referred to as 3D ocean farming. Shellfish and seaweed are ecologically beneficial and sustainable species that obtain all their nutrient requirements from sunlight and the surrounding water. Farming shellfish and seaweed also provides valuable ecosystem services and products, such as bioremediation to improve water quality through the absorption of contaminants, such as excess nitrogen from runoff from on-land sources, carbon sequestration by storing atmospheric carbon in seaweed tissues, food production in the form of culinary seaweed and shellfish, fisheries enhancement providing habitat, foraging opportunities, and refuge for local species. And of course, a range of other products, including kelp-based biofuels, fertilizers, stabilizing agents, human food supplements, and livestock feed additives. So the port and the California Coastal Conservancy have also been working together for years to implement a native oyster reef or living shoreline as the first nature-based solution of its kind in San Diego Bay. The project, now fully funded by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, thank you very much, will construct reef ball elements as seen here to form a biogenetic reef over time. The project should be installed later this year and will evaluate the ability of these reef types to recruit and establish native oysters. The effectiveness of these reefs to reduce rates of erosion along the adjacent shorelines and increase rates of deposition shoreward of the reefs, and to further understand the ecological benefit of these constructed reefs over adjacent habitats, and in terms of increased biodiversity and abundance of both fisheries and avian populations. So these are just a few very fast overview of a bunch of projects that we're working on. And thank you today for your time. And if you'd like to learn more, please go to our website, or better yet, come visit San Diego. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Eileen. Thanks, Lily, both for that overview. Again, a lot of good work and not enough time to really dig in, but really appreciate the overview. And yes, I can attest that San Diego is a nice place to visit, needless to say, for those that haven't been there. Highly encourage it. I will pause to see if there were any questions or anything else from the group here on the San Diego specific presentation here. Great. Well, I'm not seeing any at this point, so I will just again say thanks, Eileen and Lily, both. Much appreciated. And again, we'll include the slides and contact info for the Port of San Diego update, as well as others. So we are just at about 5 minutes to the top of the hour. And I think with that, I will just wrap us up. I will put on screen here, just again, our contact info. So if folks want to get in touch with us at the Alliance, obviously highly encourage you to do so. Just as follow-ups here, we do have a recording of this full presentation, or all presentations throughout the forum, so we are going to share that later. So look for that, and please forward that as you see fit to those that might have missed it. And then otherwise, we will capture all the questions and discussion in the chat. We'll also do our best to capture the affiliation of folks that attended today, just to share who was able to attend and has interest in the discussions of the Alliance, the data portal, and then all of the partners that were able to connect today. If you haven't and you joined late, please use the chat just to share your name and affiliation, and we'll capture that. Otherwise, our websites are on the screen. Encourage you to jump to our Ocean Alliance website. We do have a form there where you can sign up for our public email list, and we'll keep you updated on future activities and opportunities to connect. And beyond that, if you do have any interest in getting more info, if you'd like to connect with the Alliance, if you'd like to give us any information or opportunities to connect with you directly, that's what I'm here for and Marissa is here for. So please get in touch with us anytime. We would love to connect to hear more about your work or chances to learn more about other West Coast activities, or connect those of you that might be interested in our efforts to learn more about what we're up to as well. Beyond that, I will just close with a genuine note of thanks to all of our presenters. I know it is a very busy time for all of you, and so really do appreciate you carving some time to present on your work, and really excited to hear about the range of things we discussed. And then likewise to our audience, thank you for carving out 2 hours for those that were able to stick around for the whole time. Not an easy ask, but really do appreciate it, and I hope you found it useful and interesting. Otherwise, I will then wrap us up and just encourage you to get in touch if you'd like more info or follow-ups. With that, thank you all. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day, rest of your week and summer, and we hope to be in touch again soon. Bye-bye.